Okay everybody, I'm going to share with you my plans for an easy backyard makiwara. I wanted to build one that didn't require me to sink concrete into the ground in case I ever wanted to remove it later. Removing a big plug of concrete is kind of a hassle. So I wanted this to be relatively clean if I ever wanted to pick it up and move it or just disassemble it. And in addition, it just so happens that this construction probably weighs in at under $20 all in. So I'll lead you through the construction here, and if this helps you, that's great. So the first thing we need to do is talk about tools. I'm going to assume that you have a sledgehammer, you have a drill, and you have a drill bit that's capable of drilling through metal. Everything else you need you can get at your local hardware store. What you're looking at here at the bottom is a 4-inch by 4-inch post anchor. You can find those at your local hardware store. Usually they're used to secure a mailbox post to the ground. It's got a 3-foot spike running down into the ground under it. So what you do is you put a couple pieces of 2x4 in there and you take your sledgehammer and you drive it 3 feet down into the ground so it's nice and secure. Now when you find the one you're looking for at the hardware store, it'll have these 2 bolts here to fasten. It will not have this bolt here. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is get some lumber. You're going to use a 1x4 as the striking board. In my case, well, not in my case, when you find one of these at the lumber store, it's probably going to be about 10 feet long. You're going to need to cut it to a height that's appropriate for you. For me, that was about 4.5 feet. I'm 5'9", so 4.5 feet was good for me. Adjust up or down as is necessary for your height. So you've taken your 10-foot board and you've cut it at the appropriate height, and that's going to leave some leftover. So what you do with that leftover piece of 1x4 is you set it behind the original 1x4. Now the taller you make this second piece of 1x4, the more resistance your makiwara is going to have. If you leave it all the way down here, it's going to be nice and flexible. As you build up strength and power, you have this run taller and taller and taller, and you've got more resistance. So now we've got 2 inches of wood in our 4x4 post anchor. So you go get yourself a scrap piece of 2x4 from your the same lumber store. It'll probably cost you $1 in their scrap lumber bin. So now we've got 4 inches of lumber by 4 inches of lumber. Put it in there. In theory, it fits perfectly. In practice, not quite. Okay, so then what you do is you go ahead and you tighten down these 2 bolts here to squeeze that lumber in so that theoretically it's going to fit perfectly. In my case, you'll see I had to add a little wood shim here in the back to get it nice and snug. Your mileage may vary on that. So originally that was my construction, and as I started to pound on it, what I found is nothing was keeping the wood from slowly sliding up out of the base. So here's what I did to fix that. I went out and I got some 3/8 inch hardware. I got a bolt, a couple of washers, and a wing nut, and I think you can probably guess what I did here. First I made sure the lumber was seated all the way to the bottom of the post anchor. Then I drilled a hole all the way through the post anchor from the front to the back. I ran the bolt through a washer, through all the lumber, another washer, and the wing nut. Now this is just hand tight. It doesn't need to squeeze in here. All it's doing is running all the way through the lumber to keep it from coming up. Okay, so far so good. Now let's talk about the striking surface. Up here at the top, what I've chosen to use is just some cotton rope. You can get this pretty much anywhere. It's clothesline. So a good long length of cotton rope that you can just wind around and around and around and tie however you see fit. If that's a nice stiff striking surface is what you're looking for, that'll probably do it for you. If you need a little bit of padding under here, you want something that's not going to weather and rot, so you're going to try to pick some closed foam. Now what works best for that in my experience is a 4-inch strip of old used yoga mat. So you just take an old yoga mat and you cut it into 4-inch strips, put as many of them under there as you need, and you're good to go. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks, if that helps. Great. Oh, I almost forgot a few things. First of all, lesson learned. If I ever build this thing over again, I'm going to put the facing of the striking board adjacent to the bolts that hold it in instead of opposite the bolts that hold it in. So I'll have the facing of the striking board over here. Don't ask me why, I just think that would fit better. Another benefit of this construction, in addition to being inexpensive and not requiring concrete, is the board is very easily replaceable. All you need to do is take out this bolt, loosen these bolts. If you ever break this board, pull it right out, put a new one in. Okay, the hole that you originally drilled all the way through will still be through this piece and this piece. So if you drill through from the back, you got a nice guide hole to drill all the way through, and then slide that back in, tighten these back down, and you're good to go. One last note about weathering. Since this is outside, it's going to get wet, it's going to have rain and snow on it, so you're going to want to do something to try to keep the weather off of this. Now, I know what you're thinking. You could just throw a Glad bag and a big rubber band around that, but that's messy and ugly and frankly kind of a pain in the butt. So what I've found works almost perfectly is a dry sack that you'd get for, say, camping. This works almost perfectly. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. Slides right over the top like that. Fasten the clips. There you go. Sorry for the shakiness. And there it is. It's going to stay on in all but the highest wind. It's waterproof. And your Makiwara should last a little bit longer that way. Okay, that's really it this time.